Hello and welcome to Practical Inclusion on Melbourne Cup Day today. So I know there might be, our Melbourne viewers might not be tuning in today, but I'm sure you'll catch the replay and hopefully enjoy a nice sunny day off with a few less restrictions than what have been in the past. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I broadcast from today, which is the land of the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and future, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders that may be joining us live today or watching on the replay. Today I want to introduce somebody who I've just gotten to know in the last couple of months, really, I think it is. It's not that long. Sam Turner and I both sit on the, it's a new name, Equity Council for Queer Screen Australia, which has been just a fascinating experience so far, and looking forward to learning more and doing more in that space. But yes, connected with Sam and thought she would be a perfect guest for this practical inclusion. So I'm not going to steal your thunder, Sam. As usual, as the usual format, if you could tell us a bit about your story and really why did you start doing this type of inclusion work. And before you do, just anybody who's watching live, or even if you're on the replay, just feel free to put comments, questions, and we'll see if we can get to them while we're live or afterwards. We'll answer them. So Sam, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Bree. And thanks so much for having me and inviting me today. I'm currently in Sydney, so not a day off up here, unfortunately. But I'm on Wiradjuri land, which is part of the Eora Nation. So also pay my respects to the land that I'm currently working and living on. So how I came to inclusion, I think you know, in a nutshell, it's really been in my DNA since I was a small human. I grew up on the central coast of New South Wales, which was quite a white sort of homogenous, you know, space to grow up. But I remember when I moved house not very long ago, finding a little speech that I'd written when I was about 10 years old. And the speech was obviously about, it was one word and it was about difference. And so my opening line was, I believe that everyone should be treated the same, even if they're different. So I think that was my awkward 10-year-old way of saying that I believed in equality. But I mean, I started my career as a consultant. So I used to work for Deloitte. And it was really my first experience of inequity at work. So what I noticed was a lot of the guys in particular, and by guys I mean the men, were given these really cool assignments because they knew the partners or they went to the same school or, you know, whatever it happened to be. And I was sort of on a couple of the smaller projects, one which was in Wollongong, which is a beautiful city, but wasn't a major project. And I remember saying to my dad, you know, why is there this disparity? And Dad's kind of saying to me, well, you know, you need to stand up for yourself. And so I did. And from that moment on, basically, I've been really, I guess, unequivocal in terms of being an advocate for equality, whether that's using my voice or whether it's opening a door for other people to use, you know, their voices. So I stayed at Deloitte for 5 years and worked very much in tech, and then moved into the banking sector. So I used to joke that I moved from one boys club to another, which was like a young boys club in tech to an old boys club in business banking.
Right. Yeah.
And was often the only, you know, one of the only women in the room. And I came out when I was 28 and really had this moment of, you know, do I come out at work? And is this a safe space for me to come out? Do I want to other myself, you know, even more than I'm already othered? And had an experience of being othered when I was a kid because I grew up with a single dad, which was very unusual, you know, in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And so I stayed in the closet actually for a couple of years. And then it was only when I moved to Sydney, so I was living in Melbourne at the time, it was only when I moved to Sydney and moved employers that I really had a fresh start, and I had a lot of signals and a lot of signs. There was a Pride network, and, you know, there was a lot of stuff around Pride that made me feel like I could, be myself at work. So I went to join the Pride Network, and then, me being me, went on to chair the Pride Network, and really grew it and built awareness and education around LGBTQ in the workplace. And from there, it was just a springboard, really. I had a role on the table in banking, and I had a role on the table in inclusion and diversity. And I was like, let me think about this for 5 seconds. So absolutely took the inclusion and diversity role, and even that was a steep learning curve. Like I'm a cis able-bodied white woman, and so I had to learn a lot about how does Indigenous trauma present in a workplace. What is it like to have be a person with a disability in the workplace? And then what's my role as the head of inclusion to enable the most inclusive workplace possible? So we had lots and lots of fun, but also had a really steep learning curve, and spent a lot of time listening.
Yeah, gosh, I have so many commonalities with some of your stories. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I think the thing that's really standing out for me too, over the last few weeks, I've had a lot of conversations with people who are just moving into the diversity and inclusion space or wanting to. And I've also noticed and been looking at the career profiles of people who work in D&I. And it is so often that pathway of doing a completely different function within an organisation and having an internal job swap, promotion, demotion in some cases, into the diversity and inclusion space. It's such a common path that people tread in this work. What do you think are the challenges for people who are making that step? If they've got that type of decision for them there right now, or they're just starting to consider that might be a path for them, what do you think are the challenges for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, I think that obviously the range of D&I practitioners is very broad. And I absolutely had that decision point of, do I continue to be a strong leader, running a P&L in a business, or do I, sort of change or pivot, I think is the cool word now, to be in I&D. And I think for me, it was very much just a choice about, heart versus head, or, I guess I just had that moment where I was like, well, do I do something that I'm really passionate about and try and make a difference in that space? It's a little bit like, the worst case scenario is that you try it and for whatever reason it doesn't work for you. And I think for me, one of the key skills for people in D&I is actually the quality of curiosity. Because I feel like when you work in the inclusion space, if you think you're an expert, you're probably not. And
Absolutely.
you're constantly learning, and I think it's a discipline that lends itself to so many different skill sets. I do think there's something about having a lived experience of difference, or otherness in some way. Not that that's necessary, but I do think that the D&I arena as a whole has a long way to go in terms of actually diversifying itself. When I left Westpac, I sort of did a bit of soul searching in terms of what I want to do next. And I was just lucky enough that, Elizabeth Broderick called me and said, would you like to come and work for me? And I was like, sure, you're an Australian icon. I would love to work for you. But I did have a moment, Bree, where I was like, well, does this, I think sometimes as humans we get worried about being pigeonholed, and I thought, does this limit my, career or my capability as opposed to expanding it? And a piece of advice that I was given a very long time ago when I was worried about being pigeonholed, very, very senior CEO in Australia said to me, a female, don't be a pigeon. And I was like, I've kind of expanded that to think, well, it's not necessarily about not being a pigeon. It's actually about just trusting your authentic self and trusting your unique qualities. So trusting that, you aren't going to be pigeonholed if you have, you know, these unique qualities that you bring to a particular role. And so I think I feel pretty fortunate now. I mean, I get to work with, you know, big global tech companies, and, you know, I get to do the review work into, you know, Australian cultures in workplaces, particularly around sexual harassment and bullying. And, you know, I'm not sure what's next. But I think, you know, to answer your question around skills and capabilities, I think it's just so varied. And I think passion is one. Definitely the ability to get stuff done. I mean, D&I areas are traditionally very under-resourced for, and really run on the smell of an oily rag. So I think you have to be very, I always used to say, if I can't go over the mountain, I'm just going to figure out how to go around it. You know, so how do you use your influence? How do you get buy-in? A lot of the time, you know, from people that are either more senior than you or just not in your direct, you know, sort of line. And so, yeah, I think curiosity, that the ability to influence, definitely the ability to get stuff done, you know, and that can come from any discipline.
Yeah, absolutely. I would second both of those. That, you know, I love that task focus, and I had Ramon Martinez Mendoza on a few sessions ago, and he's one of the most driven diversity and inclusion professionals I've met. And, you know, it's bringing a project management lens to this work. It's fantastic. Now, we were going to talk about something slightly different, so we've gone off track a little bit, but I think that's really something that will have added a lot of value to the people who do listen into these LinkedIn Lives. You mentioned that you're currently with the Male Champions of Change. Can you explain a bit about the history of that? What, you know, why it exists in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll be really honest, like you know, when Liz called me, apart from the fact that it's Liz, I wasn't sure, you know, I really like to try and, I guess, you know, expand my feminism, you know, to be as intersectional as possible. And I really was probably one of those people that sat in the camp of, why are we elevating these men as champions? Like, we don't need them to speak for us. And then, you know, when I listened to Liz talking about why she founded the group, and it was really in her role as Sex Discrimination Commissioner, she kind of had this moment that was like, all of the amazing work that's being done in women's rights and women's advocacy and women's activism is largely by women. And so actually, you know, in order that, absolutely, that's going to create change. Is it really going to change the system? You know, and when we talk about that true system change, what do we need to do? And so she really had that moment of, well, actually, to change the system, you need to go to the heart of power. And who holds the power? It's, you know, the heads of military, the heads of big organizations, you know, and by and large, 10 years ago when she founded the group, it was all men. And I mean, a decade later, it's not much better, like in terms of, you know, those quite senior roles. So she really pulled in, you know, the heads of banking and the heads of the police force and the heads of military, and really to sort of, you start that discussion around what would gender equality, what would gender equity look like, not just in your organizations, but kind of in Australia more broadly. So, I mean, I think a decade ago, it was innovative, you know, it was absolutely essential a decade ago. If we fast forward to now, you know, is it still the same? No, but it's also not the same organization. And so we did a really big piece of work this year, consulting women's groups actually about, you know, the efficacy, the role, you know, the future role of Male Champions of Change. And really, I guess it's that move towards intersectional feminism, and that move towards inclusion more broadly. So we have, on most of our groups now, we have special advisors who are, you know, senior women, CEOs, etc. And so it's very much, it's not just, you know, the men sitting around thinking about how do we help.
Yeah, great.
And certainly the work that I do, because I work a lot, obviously, in the Northern Hemisphere, if I was to just talk about gender, you know, like I wouldn't get anywhere. But having that really quality conversation about inclusion, how do you create inclusive cultures? Because of the thing, I think, as an aside to male champions, I think one of my reflections on Australian culture, and certainly this was a reflection point at Westpac when we hit 50% women in leadership, I think we've done a pretty good job at elevating white women. I think that when we put an intersectional lens on that, far out, like we still have such a long way to go. Like, where are our senior women of colour? Where are our senior women with disability? Where are our senior Indigenous women? And so I think, you know, rather than thinking of that, you know, as a negative, I think of it as a impetus for change, actually.
That's an excellent explanation, because, you know, I've actually absolutely sat in that camp. You know, it gives me the kind of jitters a bit when I hear male champions of change. I think the phrase is a little bit confronting for many of us. But the way you've described it, the way it is transforming and moving with the latest thinking and the needs of the equity and inclusion space, I think, you know, there's power in that. And so it's really pleasing to hear. Please, if you're watching live and you've got comments about that or questions, put them in the chat on LinkedIn or Facebook. The other question I wanted to ask you, and this is something that I'm always pondering over, and organisations are asking me, if an organisation is ready to get going in this space, in equity, diversity and inclusion, and they're looking at the myriad of options when it comes to accreditation, because many orgs start there, which is sometimes a good thing, sometimes not a good thing. Like, I still honestly, I believe, and my approach is always get your D&I strategy right first, and if one of those accreditations becomes part of that strategy, fantastic. So that we do keep that overarching intersectional lens. But when organisations are thinking, what accreditation program is going to work for us? Is it AY, the Australian Workplace Equality Index? Is it WGEA for gender equity? Is it a rainbow tick that we need? What kind of tips can you give to them as to where they might start or how they might refine those options?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Bree, and one that I get asked a lot. More just the really sort of like simple question about where do I start? To which my answer is start anywhere, because anywhere is, you know, better than not starting at all. Look, I think much like you, I think that there are benefits in those accreditations, particularly like, so AWI is a really good example. If you're starting a Pride network and you're starting your work on LGBTQ inclusion, is that a good place to start in terms of looking at a checklist effectively in terms of what do I need to start looking at? I think that there's real benefit in that. And I think particularly if you have an immature D&I area or, you know, practitioner in terms of like the organisation and the maturity of the organisation, you know, WGEA is very similar. It's like, you know, if I'm really going to make a difference in gender equality, what are the types of things that I need to focus on? But I think actually that's the second step, or maybe even the third step, because I think the first step in any organisation is listening to the voice of your people. So it's quite it's not surprising anymore, but certainly when I first started my own consultancy in this space, I was quite surprised when I would talk to, or even now when I talk to clients and they're like, we're going to focus on Indigenous inclusion and disability and women. And my question is always, okay, how did you come up with those three areas? That's awesome, but how did you come up with them? Oh, well, they're just what we thought we should do. You know, and again, starting somewhere is better than starting nowhere, but what is the makeup? You know, are those three areas actually going to get you sustainable and meaningful change in your organization? You know, and I think so listening to the voice of your people is really the first thing. So whether it's, running some focus groups, creating some type of, survey or analytical piece, what would be meaningful for you as a person, to feel more included here. And a lot of the time it's not always what you think it's going to be. So I think that's the first step. And then, to your point, the second piece is that the strategy comes off that. And you can have a beautiful strategy that has got, all of these amazing action points, but actually if the senior leadership of the organization haven't bought into that strategy along the way, you are literally going to spin your wheels. And so there is definitely that piece of co-design and co-creation, but also, influence and discussion with the senior leadership of an organization, before you can hit the ground running. So, do those accreditations have a place? I think that they do, but I don't think that it's the starting point.
Yeah, I really like that answer and 100% agree. And I think the organisations I have seen who have started with an accreditation can quickly become overwhelmed because we know the depth of those accreditations. They're extensive and they require, usually a lot of change if you haven't started in this space before. And it can become overwhelming, seem too resource intensive, and people back off, or they might get through and fall across the finish line and get their accreditation, but they can't sustain that going forward because they haven't really set up a structure to support it. So yeah, I totally agree with how you've answered that. Now we've got some time left, and I'm really keen for you to talk about the Aurora Group that you've got and you're involved with, and what is it and why does it exist?
Yeah, so the Aurora Group started 20 years ago in Sydney. At the moment, we're a New South Wales-based charity, really focused on LGBTQ plus grassroots organisations. So we exist really to provide small grants. At the moment, it's between $2,500 and $7,500 to local LGBTQ organisations or organisations that are doing support for the LGBTQ community. And we really are, we're focused on groups that don't otherwise find funding. So, they might not be auspiced by another organisation, they might not find government funding. So we really are focused on, where the money is needed the most. This actual grants round starts next week on the 9th of November. And we're doing a really special, I'm really excited about this. We're doing a special joint grant actually with the Pride Foundation of Victoria this year. Yeah. So we're offering a one-off $10,000 grant this year, very much with a regional youth focus. I think, what we've seen in the pandemic more than ever is making sure that we're taking care of our regional LGBTQ humans. Yeah, and so that's currently what we're all about. We normally have a major fundraiser every year, but obviously, with the pandemic, it's given us the opportunity to really come internal and think about how do we make Aurora a much more sustainable, but also a bigger organisation in the sense that, a very, very small percentage, it's sort of like between 1% and 2% of philanthropic money flows into the LGBTQ plus community. And my pipe dream, which I'm trying to make a reality, is that even if we're to double that, to like 4%, that's millions of dollars that come into our community that don't currently. So really repositioning Aurora, with the infrastructure and at the moment we're a volunteer board. So really looking at how do we find some funding, for things like staff and to be able to really grow the rainbow pot, if you like, as opposed to, competing for the same pool of money. So ideally what we would love is to be giving grants, really meaningful seed funding of, sort of between 50 and 100K a year over 2 or 3 years, to really build that capability and capacity in the community.
Yeah, great. And so if there was an organisation that is wanting to donate their funds or put their support behind LGBTIQ people, is this a good option for them?
Absolutely. I think the good thing about Aurora, and one of the reasons I joined the board in the first place, was it really is an umbrella organisation for smaller. You know, it's really the organisation that you give to when you want your money to go, you know, where it's most needed in the LGBTQ community.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. And it's, again, something that I do get asked. You know, more and more organisations are wanting to contribute to the community, to any community, but they want to have that kind of social purpose and responsibility. And so, you know, I think this is a great option for those listening in to tune in. Sam, that's been you know, really fantastic. I think we've got a lot out of that. If people are wanting to get in contact with you, is LinkedIn kind of?
LinkedIn is perfect.
Yep, a great way. Excellent. Well, reach out to Sam if you have questions on anything that was spoken about today, or if you want to get in touch with that Aurora Group. Just before we go, I do want to thank all of you on my LinkedIn network who have put up with my ridiculous sales pitches over the last week or two. I've got 8 people have signed up to the Inclusive Leadership course, and they're just such a fantastic group. I think I'm going to learn just as much as the participants. I'm going to release the content on Friday for them, the online content, and in a few weeks we'll start our first live session. If anybody wants to jump in, there are 2 spots left. So if you want to jump in and have a go with us. So this group has been specifically designed for people who do want to move into the inclusion space or are already working in diversity and inclusion. We've got a lot of people who are considering that career change who have signed up, but we've also got some seasoned professionals as well. So I think there's just going to be so much to learn, particularly in these live sessions as we go through. So if you're interested, you can head to my website, www.breegorman.com.au/e-learning, and you can sign up there using the discount code Insiders25. So if you've got any questions about it, please feel free to reach out. Thanks for tuning in on this public holiday in Victoria, but not for the rest of the country. And again, I'll put this on YouTube later today, and the captions will be on there, so you can share it from there. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Sam, for coming on.
Thanks, Bree. You're amazing.
You are.